the live stream. So now I will do an interpretive dance. Cinco de Mayo. Where's my margarita? Okay. Welcome everyone to Cinco de Mayo, and we're very happy to have you here. I mean, one of the things that we're honored to be at this institution is a Hispanic serving institution and a minority serving institution. So making sure that we continue to have these wonderful cultural events is something that we really pack into our agenda, and we're going to do it even more in the future. So thank you for being a part of it. We celebrate those designations here. One of the ways that we do highlight that designation is these kinds of events in honor of Cinco de Mayo Day. Now, because of the academic calendar this year, we're honoring it a little bit earlier than the actual Cinco de Mayo calendar. There's a lot going on our campus, as you know. If you're a student in here, I mean, we're getting ready to hold into your finals, and it's a little bit of a stressful time. So we're happy to be able to provide this little bit of a reprieve from all that's going on in your plans. Next year we have big plans as well. We want to make sure that we have the ballet for Lorco and the mariachi performers and the continued collaborations with the City of Odessa and Midland Chambers of Commerce. So look forward to more of these in the future. I want to take a few moments to say thank you to a few people who worked on this. So the President's Diversity Council. If you are on the President's Diversity Council, please stand up and let us say thank you to you. All right, round of applause. Thank you for your work. The Center for Student Belonging and Inclusion. All right, there you go. Thank you very much. If you're from IT, stand up. Gosh, we love our IT folks. The Office of the Chief Diversity Officer, particularly Dr. Larry. Dr. Larry, I don't think she's going to be here. Congratulations to him. Dean of Students, Corey, there we go. Thank you very much. Compliance and Title IX, if you're here representing that group, thank you very much. Chart Wells, thank you for the food. We're enjoying that right now. And of course, our own history department. So thank you for anyone here besides Anna from the history department. Thank you for being a part of this. So a very special thank you to Dr. Anna Martinez-Catsam for sharing some of her thoughts today about this important date. So thank you, Dr. Catsam.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Whitley. Before I start, I'd like to give a special thanks to Curtis, who reached out to me to ask me to talk to you all about the Cinco de Mayo and the misconceptions behind the Cinco de Mayo. So thank you, Curtis. Okay, so I want to start off with a question. What is the Cinco de Mayo? And I've been floating around, so I've heard some of you kind of give answers. So what is the Cinco de Mayo? What are we celebrating here? Yes? The Battle of Puebla. See, what happens is that in the 1930s and 40s, the Cinco de Mayo, well, first thing, the first celebration in the United States of the Cinco de Mayo took place in 1863. And that's important to know. And the reason it's important to know is because when I've asked people, what's the Cinco de Mayo? Oftentimes they tell me, it's a made-up holiday so that we can party. Yeah, no, it's not. It's been around it's been celebrated for a long time. In the 1930s and 40s, what happens is that Mexican communities in the United States start to celebrate the Cinco de Mayo. Because these are Mexican immigrants who are fleeing. This is a generation fleeing from the Mexican Revolution. And it's a way to celebrate heritage, culture, solidarity. By the 1980s, the Cinco de Mayo becomes commercialized, and it becomes this idea of partying. And the history, the tradition of the Cinco de Mayo gets lost. And so most people now think Cinco de Mayo means big party. There is a specific event behind this. And it has now become to represent the Mexican, the Tejano, the Mexican American, the Hispanic culture. The other misconception is that the Cinco de Mayo is the Mexican independence movement. These are completely different events. So what I am going to do today is, if you bear with me, I'm going to go through the Mexican independence movement, because again, the misconception that Cinco de Mayo was the Mexican independence movement, the Cinco de Mayo, and the Mexican Revolution. Because one of the other misconceptions is that the Cinco de Mayo was a battle, the Battle of Puebla was a battle in the Mexican Revolution that took place in 1910. It's not. So again, bear with me. So what are the differences? We have to start off with 17 de septiembre, the independence movement. Now, here you have an image, and this is Father Hidalgo, Father Catholic priest, Father Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla. And this is an image of him leading the peasant army for independence. Okay, 17 de septiembre, and always take a look at the years. 1810. See, 1808. In 1808, French troops invaded Spain. Napoleon I at that time then had the Spanish king, Ferdinand VII, abdicate the throne, and he fled. And he put his brother on the Spanish throne. If you're wondering what that took place in Spain, what does that have to do with the Cinco de Mayo? Oh, independence movement. Well, in Spanish America, these are colonies. You have the Spaniards start to discuss, well, what do we do? Pledge loyalty to the new monarch, this French person. Pledge loyalty to Ferdinand, who abdicated, who fled. That's their loyalty, or demand independence. There was rumblings for independence from Spain. Spain, again, this is 300 years of Spanish rule. So what you have are rumblings. By 1808, as soon as the French came in Spanish America, you have independence movements, rebellions throughout, again, think of Latin America. All of that were Spanish colonies. In Mexico, you have secret societies that are established. Now, you have the royalists, the more conservatives, who are going to remain loyal. But then you have societies established. Some support Ferdinand. Other societies support independence. Father Hidalgo belonged to a pro-independence society. So Father Hidalgo, yeah, belonged to the society. What's important to understand is that in Mexico, in Latin America, it's not only what's taking place in Spain that affects this. Yes, the French came in. They took control. This is Napoleon's crusade for world domination. What's also happening in Latin America, in Mexico, that you have a class and racial system. And so you have individuals who might have been born in Spain, then moved to the colonies, and they're Spaniards. You have Spaniards born in the colonies, they're Creos, and they're seen as different. Then you have mestizos, who is a mixed population. You have Indios, and there is a class hierarchy. And there's agitation there. And that's also important to know, because Hidalgo, when he leads his rebellion, who's flocking to him? And that's going to be important here too. Okay, so Hidalgo, member of a pro-independence, again, society, and they have a plan. They want independence. Well, the Spaniards learn of their organization, of their plan. And so they capture, they arrest several of the leaders. Hidalgo is warned, and he's told, flee, just get out, avoid capture, just flee. Hidalgo, instead of fleeing to avoid capture, he heads to Dolores. It's a small village. And then he has a parish there. He heads to Dolores, and he rings the bell to his parish, and his parishioners gather. His parishioners are Indios and Mestizos. They're peasants. So they gather. And he declares a grito de Dolores, or the cry of Dolores, which is a decree. independence, independence from Spain. But wait, in addition to independence, two other things. Land redistribution. Again, he's dealing with landless peasants. That's his flock. So redistribution of land. Racial equality. And he starts to gather individuals. In essence, what you have is a peasant army. And he is going to carry the banner of the Virgen de Guadalupe, which is the patron saint. And so he gathers thousands of peasants. He has an army. And they're marching towards Mexico City. Yeah. As they march to Mexico City, and he's gathering, again, primarily the peasants who are calling for redistribution of land, for separation, Hidalgo's army will be defeated. They're heading towards Mexico City, and they're almost successful, but they're defeated. Hidalgo will be captured and executed. Now, who aids in suppression of this uprising? Because it is an uprising. Well, here's where that, again, if you try to understand the history, you have the peasants. Well, who aids in the suppression are royalists, those who want to remain loyal to the monarch, whether it's, at this point, temporarily Joseph Bonaparte or Ferdinand when he comes back, but conservatives. You see, although some conservatives might support, lean towards independence, they're concerned. This is a peasant rebellion who want to redistribute land, their lands. They fear that social uprising. And so they help suppress the movement. Now, the movement, this call for independence, starts September 16th when Hidalgo gathers his parishioners. Now, if you notice, independence is 1821. It takes roughly 11 years for independence. Now, Hidalgo is executed, his peasant army is suppressed, but when that happens, other individuals rise up. Now, you have rebellion for independence. 1820. In 1820, the conservatives, the landowners, the members of the church, all have privileges of the military, some royalists. 1820 comes around, and ironically, they are going to switch sides. They're going to support independence. You're wondering, well, why would they switch sides? Well, what happens is that, of course, Napoleon's defeated. Spain, the rightful monarch, is restored. And because of the uprisings, in 1820, the Spanish government is going to incorporate some reforms into a new constitution. Now, some of these reforms are going to challenge the special privileges of some classes, the church, the landed elites, the military. So at this point, you're at one point royalist, you're conservatives. Decide it's time for independence. Because if they break away, create their own nation, then the constitution in Spain, it's considered a more liberal constitution. The clauses that will challenge those special privileges won't apply. And it's at that point, because of that switch, that negotiation, and it's a temporary truce, a temporary alliance between the conservatives and the liberal rebels. The result, you have independence in August of 1821. So when we're talking about, and when you hear, well, this is Fiesta Septiembre is when Mexico gained its independence. No, it's not. It's when the rebellion began. And so what you have is the rebellion. Hidalgo's movement, although it takes time, will be successful. Now, Dolores, that small village where Hidalgo ran and rang the bell to his parish, Dolores is then renamed Dolores Hidalgo, and it's known as the Cradle of Independence. You're thinking, so why go over this Fiesta de Septiembre when talking about the Cinco de Mayo? One, to highlight that they're different. But two, there's going to be a continuation. See, what happens, if I can get this to work, there we go. What happens is that following that temporary unity between the liberal factions and the conservatives, following independence, that unity breaks down. And what you have is instability in Mexico. Political chaos, economic chaos, and you have continual. What you're going to see is a rotation in office of who's in power. Conservative, liberal, because they're going to be coups, uprisings. So what you're talking about is instability, political, economic instability for decades. So this is Cinco de Mayo image. And the Cinco de Mayo is a celebration of a battle. The battle, and you're correct, of Puebla. So what you have here, this is Benito Juarez, President of Mexico. He's an Indio, which again, think of the racial hierarchies, the racial perceptions. Mexican army, French. Okay, Cinco de Mayo, background. What you have is an unstable Mexico. You have President Benito Juarez. Now you still have factions, liberal conservative factions, and that conflict. You have continual political conflict. When Juarez takes office, Mexico is broke. Mexico, since independence, has been relying on foreign loans. Loans from Spain, loans from France, loans from Great Britain. That's how they're surviving. There's economic instability. What happens is, in 1861, Juarez decides, because of the economic crisis in Mexico, that he is going to suspend the repayment of loans to these European nations. Which, Jim, it made sense. The nation is in crisis. So a temporary suspension of loans, loan payments. At this point, these four nations, these three major nations, Spain, Great Britain, and France, decide, yeah, not going to happen. They send troops. They send troops to Mexico. So troops are going to arrive by the fall of 1861 to Veracruz. So you have an invasion of Mexico over the suspension of the repayment of loans. By the spring of 62, early 62, Spain, Great Britain, they negotiate with Mexico. But see, France doesn't. France has another ulterior motive. It's not only about the repayments. They want to establish, or they want to put a monarch in the throne. Well, take over the Mexican government. You're saying, well, why would they want to do that? Well, see, there are some conservatives who want a monarchy, who support the idea of a monarchy for Mexico. And right now, Benito Juarez is a member of the Liberal Party. So again, that's that liberal conservative conflict that you see in political conflict you see in Mexico. What happens is Britain, Spain, they negotiate with Mexico. And they realize that France has ulterior motives. They want nothing to do with that. So they leave. France, at this point, again, with the support of landed elites, the conservative factions, they are going to invade. They send additional troops to invade. And first they start off in Veracruz, and they land troops, and they start to take over some of the villages. Now the idea is to have Ferdinand Maximilian, who is a royal in Austria, to take over. The French will storm Veracruz. They will march, take control of some of the villages, and then they're heading towards Mexico City. But they go to Puebla first. And here's where you have the Battle of Puebla, May 5th, 62. And this is a depiction of what happens. Now, you're thinking, okay, the battle, what the significance? First of all, you have to realize France has one of the most powerful militaries in the world at this time. More troops, better equipped, better weapons, and they're heading towards Puebla. They don't expect much resistance. They don't expect to fail in the invasion. And as they're heading, they meet up against Mexican troops, made up primarily of, again, mestizos. And there's an engagement. The French will be forced to flee. Now, what you have to understand is that following this success, and it is a success, France will be successful. You know, they're going to take control, including they're going to head into Mexico City. And Ferdinand will be, for a while, the head of the Mexican Empire. Now, eventually, the French will leave Mexico. Okay, so you're going to have political chaos and uprisings, and Maximilian will be thrown out and executed. But what you have is French presence. So you have French success, in essence. So why celebrate the Cinco de Mayo? It's a celebration of a battle. Why? Yes?
Same reason that we celebrate the 4th of July. I mean, and also to honor, possibly to honor the people that gave their lives there. You know, this is not something that should be taken lightly. This is something that was, very dear to them. This was, it's their history. Keeping that memory alive.
And Robert is right. Robert's one of our history majors. Okay, so what you do have, and you have a celebration of Cinco de Mayo, the first celebration is in California in 1863. So immediately, reason for the celebration is that it shows that the Mexican people, this Mexican nation, will resist. And that was the major thing. They resisted. They were successful, in this battle. And it's that success. It creates this unity that they can do it. The Cinco de Mayo is a celebration of the Battle of Puebla. It's a celebration of the success of a nation. Even though, again, if you're thinking, well, in the long run, it took years before the French were thrown out, removed, Maximilian. Sure. The idea is that this event started to galvanize a central identity for the Mexican people. One of success, of resistance, and again, think of that, resistance to foreign encroachment, and that's important. So this is the Cinco de Mayo. So it's not a made-up holiday, to party. It's a holiday that now represents the celebration of a culture, of a history. Now, you have eventual success, and the French Ferdinand will be, his reign will come to an end, and you're going to have a constitutional republic. But let's talk about that. The Mexican Revolution. The Cinco de Mayo is not the Mexican Revolution. It's not a battle of the Mexican Revolution. Mexican Revolution takes place in, anyone? 1910, and it goes on for a while. These are some images of the revolution, and if you're looking up in what would be the right-hand corner, yes, every member of the Mexican society, women, children, again, this affected everyone. Men, different ages, all participating one way or the other. Some fled the violence, because it's going to be violent. But you have women, soldaderas, adelitas, that's what they're called, who are going to arm themselves. You have children who are going to fight. Okay, so Mexican Revolution, so that you know the difference again, is not the Cinco de Mayo. Mexican Revolution, we have to start off with Orfilio Diaz. Now, Diaz, general in the military, was around during the battles, during the instability. what happens is that in 1876, after, again, here's the thing to always remember, Mexico is still unstable. You're going to have coups, uprisings, rotation, in essence, of office between liberals and conservatives. And there's so many different factors that go into this. But you do have political instability. So Diaz, as part of that chaos, is going to be elected president. Now, if you notice, he serves his term, then he steps down, as is required by the Constitution. Then he's reelected, and guess what? He doesn't step down. And there are elections. We'll just say there are elections. Diaz comes in and is influenced by European culture. And he wants to create a stable Mexico, and he will. Somewhat stable Mexico. There's going to be advances, but he's going to govern with an iron glove. You know, foreign nations are going to be encouraged to come in, establish industries. The U.S. is going to come in, you know, and that leads to some of the conflicts. Britain comes in, invests in the mining industry, for example, railroad building. But here's the thing. You have populations that are excluded from these advancements. You have populations that their lands are taken from them. Various native groups, the Indios, the mestizos. So what you have here is growing discontent. Diaz is going to, when he is criticized, and there's going to be, the press will criticize him. Now you're going to have, just like you have today, a press that has different views, political views. His critics, whether they're political critics, whether they're journalists who oppose him, will be dealt with. Many are arrested and held. Others disappear. So he consolidates his power. And although there are elections, and he will claim that he is properly elected, there are manipulations. These are fraudulent elections, because he is going to claim that he's being elected by 90% favorable results. Not true. So you have this growing opposition. You have growing opposition as early as the 1880s, 1890s. There are attempts to lead an uprising, attempts from the U.S., from American soil. Texas, for example. Some of his opponents will flee, temporarily reside in South Texas, San Antonio. Lead opposition. These revolts are never successful. They're not successful early on. So as you have growing discontent by the turn of the century, and he's not stepping down, and he's dealing with the opposition, there is, again, even discontent among some of the wealthier classes, because they're seen as being left out. And again, it's far more complicated than just what the Mexican government's doing. You have in 1910, well, prior to that, by 1909, he says he's going to retire. So you're going to have an election. And you have individuals who are going to run. Madero, Francisco Madero, for example, who belongs to the upper class, wants to run. He is then arrested. And Diaz will run, and says that the people pressured him into running again. So he runs and is reelected. No surprise there. At this point, there's going to be rebellion. Madero is going to issue a call for rebellion. Now, he's not the only one. What you have to understand in Mexico, you have factions. You have diverse populations. Most of you think of, how many of you have heard of Zapata? Emiliano Zapata. Some of you. An image, this is a person, an icon from the Mexican Revolution. He represents the peasants. So there's a revolt there. So you have different factions that are rebelling. One thing brings them together. Diaz. He need to get rid of Diaz. So they rebel. Diaz will resign, and he will flee. And if you're thinking, well, that's the end of the revolution. Well, no. yes, Diaz has been removed. But the question then becomes, who takes his role? Who takes over? You have let's call it a temporary cooperation. Main goal was Diaz, get rid of Diaz. This coalition stick together? No, because you have the goals of the wealthy. You have the goals of the peasants. And when we're talking about the peasants, is it one gigantic peasant group with one view? No, they're different groups. Then you have individuals such as Villa. You have many leaders. They're just not two or one. There's so many different factions. What happens is after Diaz, you have continual conflict. You have civil war. The Mexican Revolution is civil war. So you have chaos, continual chaos. And between about 1910, 1911, when Diaz leaves, till the 20s, you have about 15 different leaders. And what you have is, again, coup after coup, uprising, military uprising, just continual uprisings. And some of these individuals are assassinated. Madero is assassinated. Zapata is assassinated. So this is the chaos, and you have continual violence and disorder in Mexico. So the Cinco de Mayo is not the Mexican Revolution. It's not a battle in the Mexican Revolution. Very different, but they're all important, and if you notice, they all fall into each other. It's about that continual chaos and instability in an attempt to address that chaos and instability. Some scholars will argue that 1920 is when the Mexican Revolution comes to an end, because you have some stability. You do have stability, but you have continual uprisings. It really isn't until the 1930s when you have what's considered an end. Because at that point, you have a new constitution that addresses some of the issues. And again, if you know anything about Mexican history, you also have the PRI, the political party that emerges, that will take full control. This is a very, very, very brief history overlook of some of the most important events in Mexican history. Okay, so when celebrating the Cinco de Mayo next time, and you're asked, what is the Cinco de Mayo? What is the Cinco de Mayo? So we started off with, what is it? So what are you going to tell people? Yeah. And here's the thing. All these events that are celebrated, whether it's the Fiesta de Septiembre, the Cinco de Mayo, or even the rebellion, the Mexican Revolution is also celebrated because of what it brought about. It is now about celebrating a heritage, celebrating a history, an important history that not only impacts Mexico, it impacts the United States. It's not only the people, individuals of Mexican heritage that are celebrating their heritage, it's part of the United States' history. Think of the Mexican Revolution. Some of these uprisings were led out of American soil. You have thousands who fled the rebellion, who established communities in the United States. We're their descendants. You go back to, let's see if I can do this, Cinco de Mayo. Celebrations in the United States, in California. 1863, you start seeing celebrations of the Cinco de Mayo. So again, it's part of the heritage of the United States. Same thing with the Fiesta de Septiembre. Well, guess what? When Hidalgo led his rebellion for separation from Spain in Texas, which is part of, again, Spanish territory, then the Mexican Republic, or Mexico, there was a movement in San Antonio. Wasn't successful, but you have a movement in San Antonio. So it's part of the history, not just of Mexico, it's a part of the history of the United States. It's the history of the people here. Now, I'm going to go ahead and stop here and ask if y'all have any questions. Yes? with lead, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, no. Oh, absolutely. It is. It's part of the history of this nation. Because you're right. The borders are completely different. The Southwest belonged to Spain and then Mexico. And the people didn't, just because the U.S. came in and declared these the borders, the people didn't get up and leave. There's a rich heritage here. And part of that heritage is tied to all these events. So you have these celebrations that go back. They don't start in the 1980s when you have, the Cinco de Mayo celebrations. These celebrations go back to the 19th century. The 16 de Septiembre celebrated in the Southwest, in Mexico, during the 19th century. So again, these are not recent celebrations. These have meaning behind them, and they've been celebrated in communities throughout the United States, throughout Mexico, for now, we can say centuries, a century in some places. So, questions, comments? Okay, so if anything, I hope that y'all remember what all these celebrations are, the meaning behind them, the richness behind it, because it's more than just getting together and let's party, let's drink, some tequila or some beer. There's a heritage behind this. There's a history behind this, important history. It makes up the identity of individuals of Mexican heritage, regardless of border. No questions? Well, if you do eventually have a question, you know that I'm located on the 4th floor. You can always just email me or stop by and see me. So I hope you all enjoyed this. I hope you all learned something from this. You're welcome.